The Holocaust killed my grandfather. He didn't die in the Shoah. He didn't die in Germany, a concentration camp, a DP camp. He didn't die after joining the US Army, deploying to the front in northern Italy. Montrose Burg, my paternal grandfather, died in 1997, just shy of his 73rd birthday. But on some deep level, the Holocaust killed my grandfather. Grandpa Montrose was born in 1924 in Idar-Oberstein, Germany, a hamlet of some 15,000 people in the Rhineland. From a young age, he loved animals. He always had dogs, small dogs when I was younger, big dogs by the time I left for college. I have a signed affidavit to the West German government from the 1950s for a claim of reparations, not for stolen artwork, but stolen education. You see, my grandfather wanted to be a veterinarian. From my youth on, reads the transcript of the affidavit, it was my and my father's plan that I take on a career as a veterinarian. I had the aptitude for this, and my father had the necessary funds to make this education possible. My great-grandfather, Lazarus, for whom my father, Larry Eliezer, was named and whose name is carried on by our daughter, Eliah, was a successful cattle dealer. Continues, I also had the knowledge and abilities required, as both in Germany and in the US, I always graded as above average. From 1931 on, I attended the grammar school in Idar-Oberstein 2. I had to leave this school in 1938 as Jewish children were no longer allowed to attend. I lived in a Jewish children's home in Cologne on Lutzow Street and attended a Jewish school. After completing the 8th grade, I attended a vocational school and was educated as a machinist. I don't need to state that after 1936, Jewish children were prohibited from attending higher schools. On the second day of the 2-day pogrom, which came to be called Kristallnacht, my grandfather's family home was ransacked by the Nazis. They kicked in doors and shattered windows. They destroyed all the porcelain and glassware in the kitchen, broke their furniture and new Singer sewing machine. Just up the street that night, the town synagogue interior was destroyed, the ark set ablaze, and the windows smashed. At least 42 Idar-Oberstein Jews perished in the Shoah, and the shul building was converted into a factory after the war. My grandfather's affidavit concludes this way. In 1939, I immigrated to the US and attended public school in Chicago for 3 months in order to learn English. I had progressed enough after 3 months to attend high school. After a short time, I had to give this up as I had no funds and had to earn a living doing manual work. The sworn statements list Montrose as a truck driver. Mostly he drove a taxi cab, his family's estate having been seized by the Nazi regime, along with his education and his dreams of becoming a veterinarian. The Holocaust killed my grandfather slowly. He built a life, raised a family. There was certainly much good, but robbed of his childhood, his resources, his village and country, he always seemed a bit stuck, sometimes actually quite mean, and arrested in his development. He got colon cancer, and surgery left him without some mobility and independence. He eschewed a further diminished experience, and he took his own life with a legally obtained handgun. But on some level, the Holocaust, the Nazi genocide, killed my grandfather. I was in the former Soviet Union when it happened, traveling through southwestern Ukraine, leading Passover Seders in devastated, formerly thriving Jewish communities. Montrose died on the 7th day of Pesach. His yahrzeit was this past Monday. This coming Monday is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. The parsha we just read is Acharei Mot, as you know, which includes the story of the scapegoat. The community sins are placed onto the goat by the Kohen Gadol, and the goat is sent away. It escapes into the wilderness, perhaps to be consumed by some sort of goat demon named Azazel. But the rabbis understood that this goat, like the one offered up to God as a chatat, will also not survive. The scapegoat from the very beginning is bound up in violence. And of course, paradoxically, cruelly, the term which once described a powerful, if mysterious, Jewish ritual has come to describe the ways in which a person or group of people, so very often our own Jewish people, are targeted, persecuted, and too often subject to violence without cause. The Holocaust, which we commemorate this Monday, was the ultimate expression of this misplaced blame, this performative hate. But there are other forms, less violent but still malevolent, and some measure of this scapegoating, this pernicious tendency to blame our people collectively and categorically when humans suffer, spread this week like wildfire across a new wilderness. Yom HaShoah's full name is actually Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, the day of Holocaust remembrance and heroism. And it's important to remember that there was heroism, resistance, in myriad ways to the Nazi genocide. Like Rabbi Alex Salzberg's great-uncle, Alex who lein Torah today, his great-uncle who heroically managed to smuggle in flour and mix it with water to bake kosher matzahs on Pesach in Auschwitz. A harrowing tale we heard during the Salzberg family Seder this year in a powerful and emotional recording from the Shoah Foundation. But it's strange, also, that Yom HaShoah occurs next week during Nisan, both because we already have a day on which to mark the preponderance of Jewish generational trauma, that's Tisha B'Av, but also because Nisan is a month of celebration, of liberation. There's no Tachanun during Nisan. But in 1951, the Knesset chose the 27th of Nisan, Shabbat notwithstanding, a week after Pesach concludes and a week before Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. And there was a great debate among the Orthodox community about this decision by the secular state at the time. Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, the most venerated modern Orthodox rabbi of the 20th century, was inclined to retain Tisha B'Av as the day of remembrance for all Jewish suffering, including the Holocaust. But his son-in-law, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, differed. He felt that Nisan was a better choice, despite the challenge of the Hebrew calendar. Why? Because Tisha B'Av falls in the summer. And he believed that Yom HaShoah should be during the school year, when children can learn the lessons of this catastrophic period in Jewish history. I will just say, as an aside, my daughter went through 4 years of high school, public high school in Baltimore City, did not learn at all about the Shoah, not once. So here's what I have to say about the convulsions we witnessed this past week at universities across the country. And I want to qualify this by saying my goal here is not to draw simplistic equivalencies between 1943 or 2024 and to offer an accounting of which protests were lawful or harmful or unlawful, which campuses handled the situation well or poorly. There are thousands of op-eds and talking heads, social media posters who have already weighed in on those questions. And my goal today is not to spend what little time we have together cataloging memes that I found offensive, or, though it's tempting, amplifying viral videos that made me chuckle, like the Kafia Dan doctoral student at Columbia who insisted that those who sacked Hamilton Hall should receive food and water because they required quote-unquote humanitarian aid so that they don't die of dehydration and starvation. And at least in this moment, Though these things concern me greatly, I will not delve deeply into the riots at UCLA, where violent thugs stormed an encampment in the name of Zionism, causing mayhem and serious injuries, and where protesters barricaded a public throughway from Jews and others who believe in Israel's basic right to exist, and fought off police who absented themselves from the entire scene for way too long. And I don't want to get into who is responsible for the insufficient amounts of aid reaching hungry Gazans, a sometimes recalcitrant Netanyahu administration, or Hamas, who promptly hijacked the first aid supply trucks to enter the newly opened Erez crossing. And I'm not today going to take on once again, as I have so many times since last summer, the vile and sometimes genocidal rhetoric of Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Because my concern today, as we read the tale of the scapegoat, as we approach Yom HaShoah, as I mark my grandfather's yahrzeit, is the vile, occasionally genocidal rhetoric of person after person, chant after chant, on campus after campus after campus. I'm concerned about the targeting of Jewish students in places of learning and what that might mean for my own kids as they go off to the academy. I'm concerned about the intimidation of faculty and students by other students and faculty. I'm concerned about high school students in Chicago who were given a wide berth to skip classes and join college student protests, not because this is wrong on its face, but because it reflects a deep hypocrisy in the way too many schools and school administrators view and treat their Jewish students. Like Jones College Prep senior Mira Rosenblum, who described how the school refused to sanction a vigil in memory of 1,200 Israelis slaughtered, but allowed hundreds of students to participate in a January walkout calling for a ceasefire. There was a time that Jew was a sort of slur. Now Zionist can be added as holding that dubious distinction. As Rosenblum says, she was called anti-Black and Islamophobic for filing a complaint against the student leaders who compared themselves to Jewish rebels fighting against Nazi Germany. Yes, that's what I'm concerned about today. Not the value of protest, which I fully support, a veteran of many protests myself. Not the importance of free speech, which ought to pervade campus life. No, I'm deeply concerned with the gaslighting, the appropriation of terms that matter, that describe trauma inflicted on our people, like genocide and Nazis and the Holocaust. I'm concerned about the sickening appropriation of real Palestinian suffering by students who are not suffering, and the cavalier dismissal of the trauma inflicted by Hamas against Israelis on October 7th and since, and on the Palestinian people since they seized control from the Palestinian Authority in 2007. And I'm concerned by slogans that glorify violence, the dispossession of Israelis from their country, and the cavalier dismissal of very hardworking Muslims and Christians and Jews, peace activists who toil for a viable shared society between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Here's what concerns me, not the fact of protesting, and not those truly convicted pacifists who long for an end to this bloody conflict. What concerns me is that these are protests that stand against a population of students in their midst on these campuses, and a minority population of Americans who are increasingly made to feel unappreciated and unwelcome. Jewish Americans are more and more victims of public shaming and violence. The vast majority of us are Zionists, whatever we may think of Bibi's government or even the war. The rest of us are assumed to be the quote-unquote good Jews, not anti-Semites themselves, but trotted out sometimes by anti-Semites, perversely justifying hate speech, intimidation, or excommunication of the rest of us. And I've got to tell you, as the grandson of Montrose Burg, as the relative of numerous family members who live in Beit Shemesh, in Bahan, in Yerushalayim, in Haifa, as friend and colleague to many Israelis who live there and here, as the Abba of two wonderful, thoughtful, sophisticated teenagers whose passion for Israel is not diminished by their passion for social justice, as a rabbi who works day in, day out to model curiosity, pluralism, compassion. I am sick and tired of hate speech, of hateful ideologies, and increasingly, it seems, constitutionally hateful people. Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of Berkeley Law School, shouldn't have to explain why a dinner party for law students having nothing to do with Israel-Palestine should not be marred by protests in his own home, or why hideously anti-Semitic caricatures of him holding a bloody knife and fork are unacceptable. Even Nicholas Kristof, who has been vociferously critical of Israel these past 7 months, flags the irony of Yale protesters blocking entry to a public space for anyone not committed to Palestinian liberation while simultaneously professing, quote, zero tolerance for discrimination of any sort within their liberated zone. Kristof, not Bret Stephens, Kristof reminds readers in the Times that, quote, Hamas is a misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic terrorist organization that is now holding American and Israeli hostages. Hamas, he writes, has been a catastrophe for Gazans. And yet, calls to globalize the Intifada or free Palestine from the river to the sea are not outliers. They are ubiquitous cries across university spaces, and these cries are now regularly intermingled with accusations against us, Jews, as Nazis, as supporters of genocide, as white supremacists, and settler colonialists. In the land we pray about every Jewish service, as we have for centuries, in a city where our holy temple once stood until it was destroyed by one occupying empire and replaced by another. I have no desire to raise the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I've been to both places, they're lovely. I have no desire to rebuild the Third Temple. But if you don't think that there was once a Jewish temple there, that the Romans burned it, that Muslim conquerors built a shrine and mosque on top of it, you are a history denier and an anti-Semite. Just as student protesters who deny and have denied within some of these encampments that Israeli women were raped on 10/7 are history deniers and anti-Semites, just as those who deny the Holocaust are history deniers and anti-Semites. This Monday is Yom HaShoah. Today we read about the scapegoat. The bitter irony is that the high priest sends the scapegoat off to die in the wilderness, but it doesn't die. Not really. It never dies. Like some perverted phoenix rising from its own ashes to torment us, it seems, and every generation it mocks us. Remember that game that kids sometimes play in the schoolyard, where the bully grabs another's arm and forces him to punch himself in the face, and then shouts, "Stop hitting yourself"? That's Hamas. And it's straight out of the Nazi playbook. That's who protesters, at least some of them, are supporting, when at least some of them shout, "By any means necessary." That's what students at Columbia are calling for when they chant, "No peace on stolen land. We want all the land. We want all of it." That's what Zainab Chowdhury, head of CARE, Maryland, and then member of the Hate Crimes Task Force, meant when she posted the following on social media, October 17th, 10 days after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, quote, "That moment when you become what you hated most." Her post included 2 photographs, one of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin lit up in blue and white just after October 7th, one from when it was decorated with swastikas for the Berlin Olympics of 1936. That's the insidiousness of scapegoating Jews. Stop hitting yourself. But my grandfather didn't flee Nazi Germany to live in another land where people would tell his grandson, his great-grandchildren to stop hitting themselves. He didn't fight the Axis powers in Europe so that I might claim or that I might adopt some Pollyannish belief that evil will simply evaporate if ignored. His cousins didn't make Aliyah so that too many Americans with profoundly little understanding of Israel, its history, the region, the Palestinians, Iran, Hamas, could castigate them with their historical trauma as a cudgel. So I stand before you this Shabbos to say this: I have no simple answers. I have no simple solutions, and I'm growing tired, so very tired of those who think that they do. For my part, I have a million questions only, one of which is, why did my grandfather do to himself what Hitler could not? Why did he have to flee and fight and die? Because of a hatred that he did not deserve. Shabbat Shalom.